Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to talk about one of my favorite songwriters of all time, and definitely one of the most unique, if not the most unique songwriters of all time, and this is Warren Zevon. Now, his career started off slowly. He came out with an album as early as 1970, just under the moniker Zevon, and it went absolutely nowhere, but he continued on in the music industry and he made a lot of interesting friends. He lived with Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham before they all got rich and famous, and he also became very well acquainted with Jackson Browne, who produced what is should really be considered his first proper solo album, self-titled, from 1976. It also didn't really go anywhere, but it gained the attention of some very important people because of the high quality and sort of left field type of songwriting. And the most important person whose ear that it found was none other than Linda Ronstadt, who at that time was one of the most popular artists in the world. And she ended up recording a number of tracks that Warren wrote for this album, including Hasten Down the Wind, Poor, Poor, Pitiful Me, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful song, and Mohammed's Radio, just to name a few. Um, and that really sort of put him on the songwriter's map. When Jackson Browne came around to produce his next album for 1978, it turned out to be his breakout album and what some still consider to be his very best. And this was Excitable Boy. It had the hits, it had the deep cuts, it had not a single bad track on the album, which is one of my sort of ways to measure and to gauge just how good an album is. Johnny Strikes Up the Band, great song. Roland the Headless Thompson Gunner, about a very famous journalist, the inventor of gonzo journalism, no less. Excitable Boy, about a sociopath. His biggest single ever, Werewolves of London, which has a lot of overtones and undertones that were so sort of controversial that we can't even really talk about them here, but really intelligent. All of his songs are very literary. When you listen to a Warren Zevon song, or especially a Warren Zevon album, it kind of feels like you've just got done reading a book. The kind of book that your teachers might tell you, you're far too stupid to read something like that. Go bang your head against the wall. But there you go. Such interesting stuff. Veracruz, another great song from that album. And another one of my favorites, I would say definitely in my possibly my favorite Warren Zevon song ever, the song Lawyers, Guns, and Money, which is one of multiple songs that he wrote about sort of geopolitical affairs. He carried on with Bad Luck Streak and Dancing School, which is one of the best titles for an album ever. And that followed by Stand in the Fire Alive album that is very acclaimed because it shows just how sort of immediate his performances were. And then came an album called The Envoy, which contains another one of my very, very favorite Warren Zevon songs, the Envoy itself. What an absolutely brilliant, comedic, witty, pithy, interesting take on global affairs in the early 1980s. And it holds up to this day because a lot of the places that we were fighting over then and who were fighting among themselves then are still fighting themselves now. And the personnel that he had on all of his albums were absolutely the top people. People like Joe Biden. Am I still allowed to have Joe Biden moments on this channel? Maybe. People like Jeff Porcaro and Steve Lukather from Toto, Leland Sklar, the great bass player who's played with everyone, but notably Phil Collins. Great drummers like Rick Marotta. Of course, Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt even did some backing vocals on some of his albums. They became very well acquainted. And the list, Waddy Wetchell, great guitar player. Mick Fleetwood played drums on the track Werewolves of London on Excitable Boy. That's an interesting bit of trivia. I bet it was Stevie or Lindsey that introduced him. So, all of his albums, one of the reasons they sound so good, not only were they produced absolutely wonderfully, but they had some of the best superstars and the best sort of top notch session musicians of all time. In the late 80s, his career became less mainstream, but by then he was a cult musician. Not that he was in a cult, that would have been funny subject matter. But in terms of his cult following, people who followed his every word, went to all his shows, bought all of his albums. And I would say that one of the top albums he ever did was from 1989, and that was called Transverse City. It has one of my favorite songs called Splendid Isolation. Absolutely brilliant. And this again had great artists on it. Mike Campbell from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Chick Corea played piano on one of the tracks. Another great one, The Long Arm of the Law. Jerry Garcia was on the title track. Dave Gilmour, David to you and me from Pink Floyd, Run Straight Down. He played the guitar solo on that. And 1991's Mr. Bad Example. By this time, he was well and truly into the cult territory, if you in terms of fandom. But his fans were very, very loyal, and his albums released throughout the 90s they sold well among his fan base, even though they weren't mainstream. Mutineer from 1995, another really good album. Now, one of his probably his most famous fan, was David Letterman, because Warren Zevon, I think, was on the David Letterman show, both in the NBC and the CBS days, more than any other artist. He performed, he did, interesting interviews where there was a very interesting competition, well, not competition, but a friendly battle of the wits. And unfortunately, by around 2002, he was diagnosed with a fatal, inoperable cancer, and it became known that it was just really a matter of time before he would die. And so he released the final album of his lifetime called My Ride's Here, interestingly named. And before he died, the final appearance on the David Letterman show was one that I really encourage you all to watch because I think I misspoke. His final album, that was his second final album. The very final album that was released in his lifetime was The Wind. But getting back to the David Letterman story, his final appearance on the show was one that was one of the most moving things ever captured on camera because David Letterman was there saying goodbye in real time to a man who had become a very close friend. He discovered Warren Zevon because he admired the music, and they ended up becoming very close friends. And it comes through both in the musical performance and during the interview segment. And the guitar that Warren played, he gave to David Letterman and said, allegedly, I won't be needing this. You hang on to it for me, or something to that effect. A life that could have and should have gone on longer, but each album that he left was so unique. And if I had to summarize Warren Zevon's style in one word, it would be wit. There was really no one like that. And because of how uniquely individuated all of the music and lyrics were, we're never going to see another person like Warren Zevon. So, in the words of Warren, enjoy every sandwich and enjoy every album. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Take care.